Welcome to Season 1, Episode 18 of Digital Dissection, where we take a closer and possibly unnecessary look at our favorite properties. Today, we're keeping things shiny as we continue our Fireflyverse week and sit down with Chris and Leslie Lott of Measuring the Score. We're comparing the musical compositions of the TV and film properties.
Before we figure out if we have enough credits to keep this boat in the air, let's get our intros out of the way. We are Joe and Mark, two dudes who love talking pop culture and bringing our passion for our favorite properties to your ears. After you listen to the show, please pay our friends Chris and Leslie a visit by searching for Measuring the Score. They're on all major platforms, just like us. We hope you give their show a listen. And if it just so happens you got here today by accident, try searching for the show by typing in Digital Dissection, a nerd podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're not following podcast websites, you can also find us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And by good authority, I believe we're on Friendster still, by searching for @DigitalDissect1. Our social media sites share more pop culture news and current information, so feel free to join the conversation. Thanks again to Measuring the Score. We probably would still be recording if we didn't have to sleep or get back to our families.
All right, folks, welcome back. We actually are returning to our Firefly week as we dig very deep into one of our favorite properties here. And we actually want to introduce some friends of ours from the Measuring the Score podcast. We want to welcome, Chris and Leslie Lott. How are y'all doing today?
Doing good, man.
Great.
Awesome.
Excited to be here, to be honest with you.
Yeah, what's got you most excited, Chris?
Actually, because we're talking, and normally on our podcast, we're talking about just one score, but we're actually talking about two different scores with two different composers. So yeah. I'm kind of excited about that. I don't know about
we've
you.
talked about doing this before, doing a comparison episode later, because right now we just wrapped up recording season 1. So we're like, yeah, let's do something comparison, maybe like a remake versus an original. But then y'all have given us that opportunity. And so we're kind of excited about it.
Great. Yeah, this is fun. I know this is new territory for me. Music talent waved bye-bye to me a long time ago. So I just appreciate it. So I'm glad that for this episode, we have two people who actually know what we're talking about, because I think you two both have like a pretty elaborate music background, don't you?
I play the flute, the oboe, and the saxophone.
There you go.
I've played in, when I lived in Germany, I played in orchestra there. I played in the Mobile Pops here for a short period of time. I never firmly went into music, but I almost did. I really contemplated on going to Juilliard instead of becoming a geologist, but geology kind of went out because I was kind of burnt out with music. So that's my background.
And I've been a film composer for almost 20 years now. And the thing about us is she's classically trained where I am not. I play by ear. So, and I only play the keyboard and everything else. And you can play the flute, the oboe, and everything else. So when I start making music, she gets mad at me because she can't understand how.
I can't put notes together. They sound horrible. That's a talent that I do not have.
Yeah. And so I'll start putting something together. And she's like, how did you do that? I'm like, I don't know.
Just did. I mean, I never made it past the recorder myself. So you are light years ahead of me in terms of distance with music.
Yeah, the closest I ever got was hearing Stomp in the mid-'90s and just occasionally like tapping on something in my house as I walked by it. That's as close as I've ever gotten to music in being a musician.
That for some of my scores. So yeah, no, you're good.
Well, I had a disappointing, childhood, because in kindergarten, you sit on the magic circle and they give kids the instruments to play. And, I always wanted to play the triangle, but I got the sticks or the block. I'm like, this is so fun. I wanted the triangle.
Hey, the wood block has a very important part in music. So, I think it might have been an honor, actually.
If there's anything like my theater background, there are no small parts. So there are no small instruments.
I was just disappointed. Just clank, clank, clank. No block.
Well, hey, you know what? Once again, we really do thank y'all for joining us. I mean, it's once again fantastic to have you here to really lean on you a little bit to help us dig into the music of these properties or the score rather, because Joe and I have talked about a couple movies throughout the early going of our show. And
we do get into some of the music of these films, and we talked about a couple composers and how it weaves into the narratives and some of the emotional, weight of the properties themselves. So so definitely looking forward to doing that. Now I know you've mentioned that season 1 has actually wrapped for you on measuring the score. So if you want to tell both our viewers and your viewers a little bit, when does season 2 kick off for you? When do you plan on picking back up?
Well, season 1, it's still releasing. We've actually gotten episode 7 up right now, which is the Beverly Hills Cop. Season 2, well, probably sometime next year is the way we've got it set up, because we're actually going to. We haven't released it yet, but we're going to have some extra stuff later on. In our season finale, we release that information, so I'll leave that there.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
We got some surprises.
Yeah, we got some surprises. So I don't want to,
Oh
say
no,
it right
no, don't reveal that here. That's
Yeah,
for your podcast.
Yeah, you don't need to drop that info necessarily. So that's fine.
So yeah, as far as recording wise, we've wrapped up season 1, and we ended with our composer showcase on Brian Tyler. That's what we try to do. Every 5 episodes, we have a composer showcase. We did James Horner, then we have Danny Elfman, and then we ended with Brian Tyler. So yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, we recorded our 15 episodes and we released after the first 5, then we started releasing our episodes accordingly. So every 2 weeks we release the episode on Monday. Right now, as Chris said, we were on the Beverly Hills Cop episode. So, we got several more to release, but as far as recording, yes, we're done with season 1. So we're excited, probably close to the end of the year, maybe beginning of next year, we'll start recording, season 2. So besides our surprises we have coming,
Right.
we're planning, a good season 2. We've already got the list kind of written. We've got requests that's come in that people have asked us to review scores for. So we have looked at that list there and kind of woven it into the list that we have formulated. So I think it's going to be a pretty good, solid season.
And we even have some guests lined up for season 2 as well. So that's going to be kind of cool.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Well, tell you what, we really appreciate the info on that. And once again, I'm not trying to blow up season 2 for you there. I apologize for getting a little bit.
No.
Well, we'll tell you what, without further ado, we definitely love to dive into, the Firefly property here, and particularly talking about Greg Edmondson, who gave us a pretty solid, bit of listening to kind of dig into here. Joe and I are both familiar with Greg Edmondson just because of, our experiences with the Uncharted video game series.
Oh, yes.
So
big fan of the Uncharted series, which I was also very sad originally to hear when he didn't make it to the 4th game in the series. They gave that to someone else, which to that credit too, that was an amazing score. But yeah, I literally replay the main 4 Uncharted games at the beginning of my summer every year when my teaching season's done. I just set them to explore and go through and love the story and love the music. I literally named my dog after Victor Sullivan from that game, so I could have Sullivan as my sidekick through life.
So
and he's not exaggerating either. So ever since I've known Joe, there's almost like a 3-week period where I don't hear from him very much, and hey, I'm just working through Uncharted again. It's like, didn't you play that? Yep, I played it last year. Don't question
it again.
Yep, just let it go.
When you guys asked me to come on, I believe I was talking to Mark, and he said, Greg Edmondson for Firefly. I'm like, wait, Uncharted? I'm like, wait, is that the same guy? So I looked it up, and sure enough, and I was like, wow, I just listened to all of those scores because I listened to the Henry Jackman for Uncharted 4, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, who did the first 3? So I went back and listened to them. I'm like, what? These are great scores. Why didn't they ask him to come back?
Yeah,
don't get me wrong. Henry Jackman did a great job with Uncharted 4. I mean, it's one of my favorite video game scores, but I really like what Greg Edmondson did with the first 3.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then Henry Jackman, I know the one that really stands out for me is For Better or Worse. Like, that song hits me really hard because of just where you are in the video game and you're not sure where Elena and Drake are going to go in their lives, if they're going to continue, being with each other. It's just completely up in the air. And that song just drags that feeling on for a good chunk of the game.
I like the 12 Towers score. Score.
Yes.
That see, he knows what I'm talking about.
Yep.
And that's how you
Yep.
that's how you know that Joe plays this game every single year, start to finish. He's not making this up, but you guys both bring up a really good point about Greg Edmonson, because he has a way of being able to really nail the emotional scenes in whether it's a video game, whether it's the Firefly TV show. There's always a way that you just know that when there's emotional moments that are starting to slowly rise, there's going to be a moment where you're going to start ugly crying. I mean, he just hits you really hard. So one of the things we like to do on this show is to dig into a little bit of the history of the properties that we research and everything. But in this case, I didn't know if you guys knew a little bit about the task that was put before Greg Edmonson with the score of Firefly.
Not really. No, we couldn't. I couldn't find too much on it. I think we found more on David Newman for Serenity than we did for Greg Edmonson.
Because he was more, David Newman is more well known than Greg Edmonson, and my research. The only thing I found about him that he was, born in the West, and I'm like, well, that makes perfect sense because if you listen to the score of Firefly, it's got that Western feel to it. It's lighthearted.
Mm-hmm.
I love, like I said, I have a diverse background, but I love Irish music and I love Old West music, or what we would consider music from the Old West. So that was the first thing that kind of stood out. I'm like, okay, this is great. This has got a Western feel. And so then when I was trying to do the research on him, and I noticed that he was born out west, I'm like, that makes perfect sense. Who knows what this was like?
Yeah, I mean, really, like this show really nailed that idea of like cowboys in space sort of thing. And I know, like just before talking, you had mentioned like Cowboy Bebop before, and it's a very, I don't know, it's space bounty hunter sort of feel to both series. And yeah, I think Greg Edmonson's score just really highlights like the fun and adventurous feeling of the Old West, but on a completely new frontier.
Well, yeah, and you had that Western feel added to the space element, which the space was it was uncharted, it was ruthless at times, and then you see the characters on screen walk around in these long Western like jackets with these. They look like guns, but they were shooting bullets. Like, what is this wizardry here? What is this?
I mean, there's one episode of like a covered like caravan, like
that's like a covered wagon. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was pretty. And that was the one thing I like. She was talking about when I first started watching the show, because sadly I came into the series backwards. I watched Serenity first, then Firefly. And when I started watching the show, and I'm like going, wait a minute, what's up with the music? I'm like, I really like it, but what is going? I'm like, okay, this is like cowboys. I'm like, this is nothing like what's going on here? I'm so confused.
Well, so when they were making or conceptualizing the score for this series, there's a couple things I like to point out. One, they only had 4 days to do it, so I thought that was really impressive that they were able to collect these different styles of music together in that short a period of time, because Greg Edmonson was literally waking up at 2 a.m. over that week to start recording. And he actually said that he preferred waking up that early because his phone's not going off, nobody's bothering him. So as crazy as that sounds, it's almost like the South Park developers. They do their shows in 6 days. Greg Edmonson did a really gripping score in 4 days. And to piggyback off of the Western conversation that y'all are bringing up, it wasn't just the Western side of things that they had to figure out balance for. It was also the Eastern inspirations, because of the fact that we have the superpowers of Earth when Earth was used up were the Chinese and then the American nations. Mm-hmm. So you had to balance both of those, not just in the cultures within the show or the dress or the attitudes, but also the music. It was incredible. They did that in 4 days.
I heard like an Asiatic element. I think like on the second or third track, you could hear that kind of that Middle East Asian type of feel. You know, I know we're going to talk about the Serenity in a minute, but then I noticed that like a lot of the script that you saw written down looks like Chinese or
Oh
kind
yeah,
of
it's definitely kanji. Japanese was the
Yeah.
So you even saw that throughout, you know, so you're right. The balance was there. You had this Old West element that kind of reflected the fact that you were in the Wild West of space. But then you had this Asiatic element that he kind of interwoven in there that it sounded lovely how he did it. You know, it wasn't conflicting in my opinion.
Yeah. And they beautifully balanced that too in you know, just in the Ballad of Serenity, you know, the main theme of the show. So the things that you've talked about here, they start off in the theme with like you're getting hit with that Western feel right away, but then they drift into some of the Asian you know, influences on like the latter half of the song. And so the first time I heard that, I just went, wow, this is very unique, but all of it works. None of this is feeling out of place. And so just the appreciation of having done that in 4 days just floored me. I just couldn't believe it.
I mean, it's also how like they just had the effortless seamless swearing in Mandarin in the show, because that could be done on network television. And it carried into the movie too.
Yeah, it absolutely did. You know, I think it's really cool to actually break down though some of the elements that we get within this score, because there's for a guy that only had to do this in 4 days and a very small amount of people who were involved with this, they had a ton of instruments involved.
Oh yeah, and that was very apparent from the very beginning, because you get this. It's like a violin or the fiddle coming in there, and it's very loud. Also, you start getting so many more elements in there. You start getting like a full orchestra. There's even like some digital instruments in there as well. And it's still blowing my mind that you said it was only 4 days. I cannot believe that.
Put
That's
something in 4 days, Chris.
I don't know that good. I mean, I really don't know if I could, you know, pull something. I mean, because it was like, what? How many episodes was Firefly? 13, 14?
13, 14, that sounds about right, yeah. And not aired in the right order either.
Yeah, so the Train Job was the first one that aired, and Serenity, I don't know if the pilot episode, the 2-hour episode, I can't remember when that aired or if it aired first or later on or what. But yeah, I mean, that amount of stuff that's going on in each episode, and he had to sit there and keep, you know, those reoccurring themes going. Man, I don't know if I could have done that.
not 4 days.
No,
huh?
not in 4 days, man. I would have had at least that could have taken a bit like 3 weeks.
Yeah, honestly, we've covered a couple times here how Fox manages to just royally screw up every one of its properties, you know, especially if they're kind of a thin line of whether or not they're going to survive. And yeah, I think it was hard enough to introduce 9 different characters in your first episode.
Yeah.
And then Fox tell you, we never want to see that episode, so give us something else. That's what they told the creators. I just don't understand that. But
Very disappointing.
yeah,
Well, they
yeah,
were
totally.
trying to like promote like so many different shows at that time. I think their big show at that time was Fastlane, and that was like Mick G, you know, from Charlie Angels. You know, they were like, oh, you know, this is going to be the big thing and everything, and it's like, no, it should have been Firefly, guys. You screwed up.
Oh, they really did. You know, one of the mysteries that I found out about the score of this show was that there were fans for quite a long time that were trying to figure out like what an instrument was from a couple different spots throughout the series. They just couldn't figure it out. So, you know, there was a couple things that Edmondson had to do because he didn't have an orchestra. He only had a few folks that were even aligned to this that could help him with it. And so throughout the series, because of this synthesizer usage at times, people were wondering, there's this one tone they just couldn't figure out. And this would actually get discovered later on. So I'm not sure if you've heard of musician Chris Bleth before, but he was yeah, he was a big part of creating the score for this series. And so years later, he would pop up on a message board and let people know that this like mystery tone that we were hearing all these years was actually a bass clarinet. Which
Oh yes, I picked up on that. I'm like, is that a bass clarinet? That sounds like a contrabass. I was eating dinner and I went back this afternoon after I cooked dinner. I went back and while we were eating, I was listening to see if I could pick up anything for us to talk about this afternoon. And I heard it. It sounded like a contrabass. I'm like, I feel like I'm in band class. Is that a contrabass? I'm happy that I'm right.
So many years later.
Yeah, it was one of those crazy things. Like I just couldn't believe that there's all these people listening to this and they couldn't figure it out for the longest time, and you just knew it right away. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
This is where it comes in, where she's the whole, the classically trained, and I'm not. So I did not even pick up on that.
I've heard around a lot of musicians in my day.
Well, that's a steep hill to climb for this show to pick all those elements out. So I was talking to Joe about this before y'all joined. And so what I ended up doing when I was listening to the scores of the show and the movie, I would funnel all of my sound through a single earbud, listen to it for a little bit, and then I would funnel it through two, and then see how hard it was to recognize when these things would change. And with Firefly, what was so unique about it was the fact that they had so many different elements that comprised this score. But just to read a couple of these things off, I mean, at any given time, we've got either a piano, a cello, we talked about the synthesizer, and then they'll come in all of a sudden and hit you with a sitar or a dobro, and it's hard for you to know which ones those are, given
It
which.
really is. It really is.
Yeah,
And,
given
like
what, yeah.
the dobro is really, used when you start talking about old Southern jazzy
Every time.
blues music. I recently put together a cigar box guitar, and with the cigar box guitar, you've got. Thank you, Chris. You've got this. You wear your glass. I can't remember the name of it, but you wear it on your finger. It's either glass or copper, and you slide. It's just done with slide sounds. And the dobro is very similar to that. It's a very, Americana-based, instruments. So I love the fact that he kind of had that in the score, because it made it have that Western feel, that old-timey Western, almost like the turn of last century type of feel, maybe centuries ago now. I forgot. We're like 2021 now.
This is great. I am learning so much. When you said dobro, I just assumed that was one of the Asian instruments.
Oh,
Like,
The first
it's
time
gotta be Asian. Oh no, it's not. That's Americana. It's classic Americana. I have no idea what any of this is.
the first time I heard dobro, I thought somebody was just like making fun of my weight, and then I went, okay, well that sounds appropriate. But yeah, the dobro is it's classic Western, like Americana, like if you've never seen one before, like this is for the folks that have just never visualized it. Leslie talked about how it's played. Typically it's, you sit down and you're actually holding it over your legs, right? Almost like a keyboard in a sense. And you're playing it across your leg, and it's every time I've seen it, that's how it's been played. And so, that, like, every time you hear that, like, once you know what it is and you can kind of pick it out, it's just something you listen for now throughout the series.
You slide. So it's not plucked, it's the sliding sound. So basically you pluck on one side and you slide it. So it's got a sliding, where the sitar is plucked because you got more than one string. So if you actually listen to the sitar being played, you could tell because you can hear the string work. But with the dobro, very much like the cigar box guitar, it's slid down. So it's like that. It's got that. It's not distinct, plucking noise that you would hear like on a guitar or a stringed instrument.
I think the first time I ever heard about a dobro was the song Curtis Lowe.
Yes.
Leonard
Skinner.
Yeah, Leonard Skinner.
We're from the South.
Dobro. That's the first. I'm like, what's a dobro?
We're from the South. If you haven't listened to the Ballad of Curtis Lowe, he talks about Curtis Lowe and his dobro.
Yeah. Well, one of the first times I even heard of a similar dobro was from the Congos. The song "Come With Me Now." They play a version of an
Love that
upright dobro. Oh, it hits you every time you hear. I mean, every time I hear it, I get the hairs are standing up in the back of my neck, and so that was one of those things I really loved about this series. But something I thought was cool about something that happens in the movie. We'll save it for the Serenity movie, but in the series, they kind of saved individual instruments for certain characters. And so what I thought was really interesting, it was they actually have an Armenian oboe called the duduk that they use for what's his name, for Mishka, the mobster that cuts off Mal's ear. Right. His theme specifically uses the duduk, or I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's duduk or duduk. It's hard to know exactly where I'm enunciating it properly here.
Mispronounce stuff all the time on our show, so no, that's fine. There's like so many times I've sit there and try to say an instrument to somebody, and it's like a more professional composer than I am, and he goes, "You're saying that completely wrong," and I'm like, "I don't care. I know what it is. I know what the sound it makes. Here, that's what it makes." So yeah, no, you're fine. A deduct.
Yeah. When you said deduct, I thought it was like a Dybbuk box, like those haunted things. So again, there's a reason why I have not made it past that recorder.
No,
if that wasn't obvious at this point.
Well, I mean, Joe, to be honest with you, the duduk, it looks almost like an East Asian flute or recorder. If you didn't know what it was and you just looked at it, head on, it honestly kind of looks like that. But that was what I thought was really awesome, because once again, we're talking about this in the frame of 4 days. How did they have I guess who else was involved in this to be able to rope in all of these different instruments that just work so well together? I mean, it's just, yeah.
As you just mentioned, you had a different instrument for each one of the characters. And Chris and I, when we watched the show, we discussed how kind of reminiscent it was of The Good and Bad and the Ugly. Because
really
when The Good and Bad and the Ugly came out, granted that score has won, tons of awards. It was groundbreaking, but The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, each one of those characters had a different sound that corresponded to that character. So anytime you'd see the character, you would hear his theme. So, that was filmed in the American West, supposedly during the Civil War. That was the whole premise of that movie. And so even watching this, you hear those elements, and it puts you in mind of that score and that movie that was filmed in the West.
So one of the things I found out about Greg Edmonson, I was looking at his IMDb, and there was not a whole lot of big name stuff. Firefly and Uncharted was like his bigger things, but like his first thing was a show called Cop Rock.
Oh my God, Cop Rock.
Yeah.
No.
That was the first thing
no.
on my IMDb. He was like a music co-producer on that show. So it's like, have you guys heard of this? So I mean, Joe, apparently you have, but Mark, have you guys heard about this show?
For me, that's a 404. So that is a file not found over here.
I am now forever scarred that Greg Edmonson is attached to Baby Merchant in any capacity.
Really, it's a musical show about cops.
What?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the question I want to ask: if Firefly had kept going, when would we have gotten the musical episode?
I mean, that seems like a standard. It's like a season 5 is the musical episode.
Well, no. See, so Josh Whedon, he did Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and Buffy had a musical episode where they sang.
You had the two elements right there: Josh Whedon, who has a musical, episode in Buffy, and Greg Edmonson, who did Cop Rock. So you were going to have a musical episode in Firefly if the show had kept going past the first season. As soon as I saw this, I'm like, this would have happened.
This would have happened.
I would have seen Mal and Jane just strike up a musical, and then
interlude,
and then River would have just danced the whole time or something.
Well, you know what though? It's funny you mentioned this, because there would be a critical building block to Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog, if you remember. Nathan Fillion would be in that. So, I mean, what actors can usually sing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess we did get our Firefly musical with a
Crossover.
You know what though? I'm really happy you bring up you know, how Mal and Inara, how they interact with each other, because when we talk about the themes of the characters, they are two of the people who Edmondson really liked to elicit an emotional response from when you see them together, right? Because we have this will they won't they relationship. Neither one of them wants to tell the other person how they're feeling. So how does he do that? He does it with violin that almost tears your heart in half. I mean, every time I hear it, and I don't know if you agree with it or not.
No, definitely. And violin, I hate to say it's almost stereotypical for that to happen, but it's the only way to really get that emotion across. It's the romantic way of doing that.
You know, we had a episode that we recorded on James Horner. Have we released that one yet?
Yeah, it's
So we
it was
released that
5.
episode. So James Horner, you know, he's a composer, and he was really good at eliciting emotion in his music. There's scores that I can't even listen to his if I'm in a sad mood, and I've mentioned it in the podcast. It will make me just start crying. But he uses the violin, and like Schindler's List, for example. When Schindler's List came out,
Yeah, that was John Williams.
It was John Williams, but the theme was done on a solo violin. And even listening to that theme song, it makes you want to tear up. So, you know, Chris is correct that, you know, you hear this violin, you see these interaction between these two characters that have this kind of inner love story going on top of everything else that's going on in the show. And you've got this love story that, you know, is expressed with this violin. And, you know, it was really intelligent design, you know, on his behalf to do that.
And I've even done that in a lot of my scores. There was a film I scored called Chemical Peel. And
it's a horror movie, guys.
Yeah, it was a horror movie, but there was one scene in there.
I thought you were gonna. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, there was this one scene in there though. The director wanted this very personable sound, and so he was like, "Hey, can we have like a solo violinist come in?" And it was the first time I ever worked with like a live instrument. And the entire scene, I originally had like, you know, more orchestra coming in, piano and everything else. And then when I heard the solo violin part, I just left that, and I said, "This is what we're going to have," because it brings more emotion to the scene if we have just the violin.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say for a moment that when like you need to apologize to Leslie for something, that you just have a solo violin because you know it's going to really help the apology hit. But
I have a violin.
Yeah.
I don't know if he knows I have one. It's in the closet.
No, I've seen it.
Okay.
I might do that now. I'll have it on a soundboard. I've always said I need like a little personal soundboard, and I can play it whenever I want. So I'm going to do that from now on. You know, when I do something stupid and I have to apapologize, I'll just.
Let me know how.
Punch him.
Yeah.
Let me know how that works, because traditionally I've been using a cowbell in that same scenario, and so needless to say, I am single. That scenario just doesn't work. Cowbell has
well, now you
no
know.
features.
Use the violin. Use the violin. You'll be okay.
Wrong choice instrument.
Yeah. Well, a cowboy is for fever. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what the prescription's for. It's always cowbell, but it's not.
Exactly.
Not love interests. No.
which is shocking to think that we've got like this space western, and the cowbell was not used a whole lot for the score. It's like a missed opportunity here. You know.
Yeah, I think that would have been for the musical episode.
I give them a lot of credit for what they were able to do in a short period of time here, and there's a lot of responsibility, I think, in balancing how they put these instruments, you know, to work. And to piggyback once again off of the violin, they don't just use it for Mal and Inara, but they also lead off the pilot with it at the Battle of Serenity Valley, you know, where they lose the battle, and that's all you hear. They wash out all the other noises. You just hear the violin, and Mal is staring at the ships as they're, you know, slowly coming in. They're losing the fight. Right. And so for me, that was the first time I saw it. I saw that episode. I mean, I didn't know how to emotionally react to it. It was that powerful, and it was a Fox TV show that elicited that response out of me. I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah, it was an amazing amazing scene with that, and especially, you know, again, Greg Edmonson, you know, really pulled it off, especially with only 4 days. I hate to keep saying that, but I mean, that we just really need to address at how powerful that is. You know, he could only do this with, you know, he had 4 days to do this, and he created that much of a response
And
with you right
limited
there.
orchestra. He had limited, you know, resources on
Right.
top of that.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
that's
like MacGyver of the music world.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm gonna make a score,
yeah.
and I've got a bass clarinet and a dobro. Let's see what we can do.
yeah.
come from
And
Yeah.
a turkey baster out of nowhere.
Yeah. See what you can do with this.
got some Scotch
Make me
tape on
cry.
fire. Let's do it, you know.
And a rubber band. Get a score.
Well, yeah, it's just amazing. I still, once again, I am floored by the amount of instruments they were able to collect for this score, what they were able to do with it, and just how they were able to keep everything unique, you know, in bringing those together, rather than just making it sound like a flare in a piece of music, right? And there's a term you're going to see a lot if anybody wants to research the score of this property. You're going to see, in quotes, ethnic winds a lot. For some reason, they love to say ethnic winds when they talk about using things like, you know, bamboo flutes, for example. You occasionally hear those throughout the score of this, which I always thought was interesting, just to call it ethnic winds, because I wanted to actually find out what they were using. I didn't know if you guys found any other specific instruments like that.
No, not for like the ethnic winds is something that's used a lot, because a lot of the software that I use, it's, you know, there'll be like a different category and it says ethnic winds or ethnic drums, you know.
And
So
a lot of those wind instruments aren't like, you know, our classic instruments you'd see, like, you know, in the orchestra and the band. It's like pan flute, for example, or the instrument you mentioned earlier that was like a recorder. You know, one of those, that's part of that ethnic wind, you know, group. It's just native instruments, because, you know, men, kind from the beginning, it seems like they've been making instruments out of whatever they could, and the woodwinds were one of the easiest, because they're like, oh look, here's a reed, let's blow into it, let's make a music, you know. So let's whittle this.
oh, here's a beer bottle, let's blow into it, you know.
I do that. I do that. He's like, stop making that noise. This is
Well, I'll sit there and she'll start doing it, and I'm going, I'm focusing on my phone or something or music, and I'll just hear like, and I'm like, what is that noise? Am I going crazy? I look over and she's looking at me.
I'm playing in a glass bottle. I'm like, oh look, I got a glass bottle. Let's sing it.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Well, I guess, you know, I've shared a couple of standouts for me. Are there any other standout moments, you know, for anyone else here from what they've been listening to?
Let's see. One of the things that really stood out that I did find that was really interesting, how he could do from, you know, go from the live orchestra, or, you know, the lack of instruments, you know, orchestral instruments he had, and he could go from that to the synthesized sound, and it could do it almost seamlessly. I mean, and it wasn't like the synthesized was, you know, too much, because even back then when you had the synthesized or digital sound, it sounded like that. You could kind of tell. I was like, you know, it's not quite there. But with this, it worked. There was a nice balance of all of those instruments. So I mean, overall, I mean, the entire score was fun from beginning to end. So I don't really have like a standout piece. I mean, all of it, I enjoyed every single bit of it, and it was one of those I can go back and listen to again from start to finish. I just leave it on in the background. So that speaks a lot right there, because there's only like a handful of scores that I can really do that with, is just to go back and listen to them again, even after I just finished listening to it.
You hear something different.
Right. And hear something different every time.
Well, to make sure that there are some, or that there's no dry eyes in the room left before we move on to Serenity. Ironically enough, one of the last pieces that was made by Greg Edmonson would actually be the score for The Message, which, if you remember, is the episode where Mal and Zoe run into one of the soldiers that they knew from their past history as Browncoats, and they have to deliver his body back to his family. And so at this point, everybody on the cast had been gut punched. They knew they were canceled. So they're kind of putting the last pieces of work into the series. And Greg Edmonson created the score for The Message, knowing this would be his goodbye to everybody else on the show. So as you listen the next time to the score of The Message, you know, it's already one of the hardest hitting pieces or hardest hitting scores from this series. But just knowing that the next time you see it, just make sure the tissues are nearby, because my voice is getting shaky just talking about it. I'm being completely honest with you. Seeing it and knowing the context of it makes that episode hit so hard. You need to be sitting down every time.
Well, before we did this podcast, it's been, you know, a very long time since we sat down and watched Firefly. And so as we started watching it again, I was like, all right, I need to finish this. So now that you said that, when we get to that episode, it's going to be very hard to sit there and not tear up.
Yeah, Chris is like, yeah, we got to finish this now. We've started it. Now we got to finish it, you know? And I'm like, yeah, the first time I watched it was with Chris. I hadn't seen it. So we've been together almost 10 years. So when we first started dating, we sat down, he's like, oh, you got to watch this show. When I lived in Germany, I missed out on a lot of the American TV. You know, I watched German television and German MTV and some weird shows, you know, or American shows dubbed in German, you know. So I missed out on that. So when we started watching it, Chris is like, oh yeah, we've got to finish this now. And I'm like, absolutely. I forgot how much I really like Firefly. And so I will have to also go back and listen now that I know the background story to that scene. To see how impactful it is, because, you know, there are a lot of instances where the actors know that that's going to be their last recording and they put all their emotion into that, you know. For example, Supernatural run for so long. And then, you know, when the guys found out they were canceled, you could tell in that last season that they were upset. And so I'll have to actually focus on that too.
And it's gotta be hard for a composer too, because it especially since he probably put so much into the score, it was probably very emotional for him, you know. And you know, from what you're saying, Mark, it's got to tell in the music. It has to.
Yeah. And I think that's actually a good segue into discussing the film that would be called Serenity, named after the Firefly class ship that Dave Newman would end up taking over the score for. Because, you know, when Universal ended up deciding to, you know, give piles of money to these people to make a full-fledged movie out of it, unfortunately, Greg Edmondson was one of those people that they said, you don't have enough Hollywood experience, so we need you to find someone who does.
Yeah, and you know, my research that I did, Josh Whedon wanted a composer that could do practically anything, and so when he mentioned that, David Newman's name came up, and they suggested him because, you know, he was attached to so many films. So even Josh Whedon requested somebody that was like a knack of all trades, and Dave Newman got suggested. Oh, Josh.
Yeah, Josh.
Oh, excuse
Josh.
me.
Oh, it's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah, we're totally fine. Yeah.
So.
Well, you know what? Something interesting about Dave Newman that I think some folks may not realize is that he comes from a very prolific family, you know, of composers. And one of them that I wanted to talk to you specifically about would be, you know, Randy Newman of Toy Story fame.
You got
he would ironic. Well, hey, to talk about Cop Rock one more time, Chris. Randy Newman did the score for Cop Rock.
No, are you serious?
He totally did.
I didn't click the IMDb when I was looking at that. So, oh man, that's funny.
I think we're gonna have to include like at least 2 Cop Rock songs, like linked into like this episode. If you haven't experienced it and feel like you really need to, here are the 2 best ones. Best Cop Rock songs.
Yeah, I honestly, before we recorded tonight, I did not know that was going to happen, because I haven't seen Cop Rock a whole lot, but when I Googled it, the first name I saw, Randy Newman, and I went, what? How is this happening right now? This isn't real. Wow. Yeah, totally.
This Twilight Zone.
That is crazy.
Yeah. I'm looking behind my back and I'm getting freaked out, you know. Good Lord.
So imagine like what the pitch meeting for Cop Rock had to have looked like. Like, you know, it's really popular police procedural shows. You know, it's also great Broadway. What if they made a weird love child for TV? And Fox is like, you know what? We've got some cash. Throw it at it. Let's see what happens.
Yeah,
And then also
the
after it
worst?
happened, you're like, oh no, this is
Oh.
no, this
Was
is
it like
bad.
the Star
Yep.
Wars Christmas?
Oh.
Christmas
I don't know if it was that bad, but it was
oh
pretty
no,
bad.
that was pretty bad. Singing Ewoks?
Yeah.
No.
Hey, I know a guy who can record for us that sounds like he got kicked in the mouth by a horse. Let me call him up real quick. You're gonna love him. But yeah, you know what?
Oh,
So yeah, Dave Newman would pick up the mantle there. You know, once again, you mentioned he was a referral from Universal, and I didn't actually realize this at first that he collaborated a ton with Danny DeVito and Tim Burton. I mean, pretty much he was attached to all of their work for almost 15 years, wasn't he?
what? David Newman?
Yeah.
Danny DeVito and Tim Burton. He was attached with them. And so when I was going back and looking at my research at some of the stuff that he's done, I was looking at his filmography. I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize he did all of these movies and all of the my childhood movies that I used to like as a kid. I'm just like, wow, he's just like all over the place.
Well, like in the notes, you got the Brave Little Toaster, you got the original Freaking Weenie, and
Yes.
then
That's Tim
Throw
Burton.
Mama, Throw Mama from a Train, or Throw Mama from the Train. Sorry, and then what else? You got Eddie Murphy. He did a lot of Eddie Murphy films. He did Bowfinger. He did the Nutty Professor 1 and 2, I think, and then he also
Critters?
did
Yeah.
and Critters. That's one of my favorite films.
Yeah, he's a Critter fan.
Yeah.
Critters.
And that was a
Critters.
really interesting score too for Critters, because it was like a mixture of orchestral and synth sound. Back in the 80s synth though,
Mhm.
and that was
And one big rock song, one massive metal rock song that was made explicitly for the movie.
yes, Power of the Night.
I've never
Power
seen.
of the night.
Uh-oh.
He's a
He did that
con.
rock fist. Oh no, rock all the time.
Well, I remember
Go.
the music. It had that too. It
Oh,
had
yeah, I
that.
know.
that,
You
did.
that
can't have that,
Mhm.
that power ballad without that rock fist.
what was it? Johnny Steele. It was
Johnny Steele. Yeah, it was Johnny Steele.
Well, Joe, there's even more cred that he would have with you. He also did the score for The Phantom.
Ooh,
So-
the Phantom.
Yeah.
Love
Billy
me some
Zane.
Billy Zane Phantom movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, movies. There's only the one, just the one movie.
Yeah.
Sadly,
Yeah,
didn't get a
Yeah.
sequel.
That was
Yeah,
a
I
fun
mean-
movie.
Yeah, I like the Phantom. I'm kind
And
of sad
also-
they didn't go with like the original like caution stripe underwear that he wore originally. Like, let's just go with black. Like, we have a
Yeah,
weird, like, it probably
That was a
won't read
smart
well.
choice. I think that was a smart choice.
Well, and you know what? Dave Newman probably just didn't have the time, even if they did do a Phantom 2, because of all this other work that he was involved in. And, by the time he would come to Serenity, one of the things I was concerned with, like, obviously I've listened to both of these properties, watched both these properties for the last, 15 years. And when I started to think about listening to this for the score, I thought, is money going to really impact what this property does emotionally? Because when you start to think about going from this, like, almost like a grassroots, pull them up by your bootstraps to get this thing done, ingenuity type of conversation, and then you get into actually having money, time, studio backing, just how different is it going to feel here? And so that was my first thought of going into this, kind of with a blank slate, thinking about this score. And does the Hollywood feel of this, distract from the movie in any way for you?
So, and I discussed this with Chris yesterday because we watched Serenity yesterday. It's been, like I said, it's been a while since we watched Firefly and Serenity. And, when you listen to Firefly, you hear that Western lighthearted feel. You had all of this tension in the show, but yet because of the score, you had this lightheartedness about it, that, they were trying to do their best. Not sitcom-y per se, but it was light and airy and nice. It had a nice flow. When I started listening to the score to Serenity after we started watching it, and I noticed that lighthearted feel was gone. It changed the whole feeling of the movie, in my opinion. And in my opinion, it wasn't necessarily a good thing. I tried to keep an open mind throughout the whole show because I really loved the movie. But you had such an intense score, in my opinion, in pieces. And the intensity to me was kind of too much in places because, the main character, he was quirky in the show. Chris and I loved his quirkiness. We loved the fact that, he kind of cracked jokes. It wasn't, I would say, dry sense of humor, but it was funny. He would have jabs in there that were hilarious, and the score kind of added to that. But once you get to the movie and you get this Hollywood feel of this, and this intensity and this foreboding sound, and when he would crack jokes, it just did not, in my opinion, register as funny as they would have if they were in the show.
Yeah.
So I felt like it kind of changed the kind of direction of everything at that point, just introducing this different score and this different composer.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing too, it was the Midwestern feel was, the cowboy feel. It was gone. It was gone right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying the score was bad. I mean, that's not what we're doing. I mean, because David Newman is a fantastic composer, and the score is really well done.
Mm-hmm.
Just when you're coming from the show and you got what Greg Edmonson did, and then you come into the movie and it's like David Newman was just like doing his own thing, but he was kind of copying some of the stuff that was done with the show, but in his own way. It did not work. It did not.
No.
There was no continuation there from the show to the movie.
And one thing
that I
Yeah.
would like to have heard that.
Yeah, and one thing that, like, when I went back and watched the movie recently too, is noticing just how much the movie, like, there actually isn't music, where they drop the score almost entirely. And I think while that is really good sometimes to, like, add to the drama or add to tension, just make you live in the moment of the movie, one spot that I thought was a really missed opportunity that could have used a lot of that lighthearted Western feel was when you actually got back to seeing the crew for the first time in the movie, and you're
Right.
kind of seeing that's like business as usual for them still. And they have that lighthearted banter among them all. Like, that would have been a really good spot to have that same, like, space Western-y feel that just was completely missing from this score.
And it's
And,
like maybe he
yeah.
tried to make a Western sound, but
Mhm.
to me it sounded more Irish. I'm like, why is
Yeah.
it sound
Mhm.
Western? It was missing, the dobro, for example.
Yeah.
You didn't
yeah.
hear that, and I'm like, this is Irish sounding. This is not Western to me.
And Dave Newman also admitted this himself, that he wanted to pay some homage to the show and their score, but it only really comes across two different times here. So that violin pokes through a little bit of the the orchestral work that they're doing in the very beginning. I think it's the right after you're seeing the Serenity logo and everything, and they're playing you the theme. You hear that violin come in a little bit, so you're that's familiar if you love the show. But he wouldn't reprise that at all throughout the rest of the movie until the very end. He brings back some of those strings at only those two moments in the whole movie. And yeah, it feels like it's a missed opportunity just because of the emotional weight that we've talked about, and how it was used masterfully over that one season of TV. And so, yeah, it's like you said, Chris, very careful to say it's not a bad score, but in comparison to what has already happened here and what they've used to control narratives before, why completely avoid that style of storytelling?
Right. And it also sounded like he also tried to experiment a lot with the score, because from the list that we just gave you, a lot of his background is comedic, almost family oriented films. And then you get Serenity, and it's a very dark sounding score. I mean, like we just said, but there was a lot of experimentation in there, and some of it worked, some of it didn't. There were moments in there I'm going, that's just not working. There was weird piano movements in there, and I'm just going, what is going on here? What was the thought process there? Was it, Joss Whedon coming in there, or was it the executives coming in there saying, hey, look, we want it like this? Because if they were the ones, if it was the executives coming in, or Universal coming in saying, hey, look, let's hire Dave Newman. Let's, instead of Greg Edmonson, maybe they were kind of influencing the score, because that does happen a lot. So I wonder if it was one of those things. Is I want to be like a fly on the wall, kind of sit there and go, what was the reason why? Why did you do this?
Why?
Well, okay, so like digging into the history of this, it's a combination of both. So we talked about how Universal came in and said, we don't want you to use Edmondson, we want you to use Newman. Well, then Whedon himself also told Newman, I don't want you to make what we had for the show. I want you to do something more in line with your own interpretation, because Newman had never even heard the score from the show.
Oh,
So
wow.
it was literally a combination of both.
I think that we just covered Star Trek, for example, and we just did that episode. And he was able to take the elements from all of the shows and the movies and make it his own. And it stand alone, but yet it felt like it fit into the Star Trek universe. Danny Elfman. Danny Elfman is really good at taking somebody else's work. If he, if somebody's done a movie before him, taking that score piece, integrating it into his score, making it his own. I think that if they would have given Dave Newman the chance, he could have taken some of that feel from the show, integrated it into the movie, and made it his own. He could. I mean, composers do it all the time, and they have done it. And I think that it would have been possible if they would have given him that opportunity.
And it's sad to hear that Whedon was one of the reasons behind it. I mean, because, given the fact that Edmondson, only had 4 days with Firefly, it was like, okay, well, and what he did was so great. Why detract, or why not bring that back? Why? I mean, again, it's the thought process of why do that? Why do that?
Yeah, and why kill Wash in the last 15 minutes of the movie? Why are you doing any of this?
That's right. We were so sad.
Here's the thing with the movie. Like I said, the way I got introduced to the series was the movie first, and I'm going, oh man, when they killed that guy, I really liked that character. And then I started watching the show. I'm like, he's one of my favorite characters in the show. Off in the movie. And the movie really, to me, we watched it last night, and the movie to me really starts to fall apart by the third act. When you get to this, I mean, you got the Reavers and everything else, and I'm start going, what is going on? I mean, this is nothing like the show, and they're like in some weird town. I'm like, I'm so confused and lost, and now you got zombies pretty much into the mix.
Yeah.
And then
Space
Wash
zombies.
dies,
And of all the zombies out there, the Reavers honestly make the least sense out of any movie zombie. When you really break them down, like they're these like, they're like just full pure rage is how they explain them. But yet, like they kill everything except each other. They're not mad at each other for some reason. And even though they're completely mindless, they can fly spaceships.
Exactly.
Like, how do they fly spaceships? Like,
Joe,
I can't do that, and I'm educated reasonably.
You and I have just talked about how, the reaction of Chris Farley on SNL when he finds out he's drinking, coffee crystals instead of regular coffee.
Yep.
Now, that kind of rage, I think, is possible to wrap my head around for the Reavers. Okay, like someone told these Reavers long ago that you were drinking coffee crystals, and now they're just out to get rid of them.
Out to kill.
Everyone must die. But you know what though, Chris, to your point though about that, right? You mentioned how this movie feels so much different from the TV show, and the score has a lot to do with that. Now, the one thing I will say is that you mentioned this builds to this point, right? Like you're introduced to the core group again. We go through some stakes that start to rise just a little bit. And throughout that time, this score is consistently brooding. It's a brooding score the entire time. So it's leading up to something. So for me, when you finally do see, the Serenity pop through that cloud, and then it just has all the Reavers behind it, at least if you're paying attention to the pulse, you're not going to really be shocked there. So I would say, at least in the sense that the score knew that it had to, I wouldn't say hold your hand, but illuminate the path a little bit. You're going to get to something eventually. At least it succeeded in doing that. I think you're taking these serious tones and ushering people towards what's basically a scene you haven't witnessed in the Firefly universe yet.
Right. And no, I'll give you that. It is very big. It is very grand. A lot different than the show because Edmondson's score was very small, compact, not just by his limitations, but also the score itself, what he was designing with the characters and the story. And what Newman had, he had to basically take that and make it his own thing and then go big and grand. And for that scene that you're talking about right there, I remember hearing there were action moments before this, but they were never that big and that chaotic. And when I heard that, listening to it, I'm going, okay, what is happening in this scene? Because it is utter chaos. I don't even want to know his writing process for that, because there were so many different instruments just going off all at one time. The huge low brass, and the percussion instruments and the chasing strings that he had going on in there. It is just insane to listen to on its own. And for the film, it's even more chaotic because there's so much going on. I mean, it was nuts. It really was.
It sucks you into the scene. So like yesterday when we were watching it, it sucked you into the moment that, they're trying to break through. You got this, ultimate assassin fighter that seems to be, tracking them throughout the universe. But it had the ability to pull you into that scene. And it did its job. And I agree with you there. It built to that point, and then, then all massive chaos and hell broke out.
But it's after that, that's when the film, to me, kind of starts to, falter a little bit. I think that's when the film starts to kind of fall apart. Same with the score. The score, I mean, it's tracking along with the story. So even it itself starts to kind of go down a little bit, in a sense.
Yeah.
And it really goes downhill after Walsh has killed him. So
But I think they really knew what they were doing. They're like, he's gone. The heart of this movie's gone. Let's just finish it the best we can. Like, really.
Through it. Let's finish.
Yep. We got a half hour left on the shift. Let's just get it done. Yep.
Yeah. Let's just do like a Rodney Dangerfield movie. We'll just play some 80s rock at the end, and let's just roll those credits.
Let's bring in Danny Elfman for this end part right here.
I really like what you said though, Leslie, about pulling you in, because before this scene in the movie, you do have layers to some of these some of the score where you've got guitar. All of a sudden they hit you with mandolin. You hear ukulele in a little bit. You hear banjo at some point. So, I mean, Chris, you mentioned how that can be sporadic in this big action sequence, but it does help. I mean, establish a little bit of an identity earlier in the movie, but not in the sense that we got with this balance of culture in the TV series, right? Because you have instruments that are on the other half of the world that they're bringing in for these really poignant scenes, and they make a lot of sense. They fit, and here it's just it can feel like a mess at times, unfortunately. But the example I gave Joe, we were talking about this a little bit, was that if you've ever walked into a movie halfway through, you're just late, right? You accidentally walk into it. The music from Serenity, I felt like if I walked into that theater not knowing what the movie was, I just assume it's generic action movie music.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what it suffers from.
And like I said before, since this was my start to the Firefly universe, and when I saw David Newman's name, I'm going, what? And see, at that point, that's when I really started liking, a lot of film scores. And I remember it, like you said, it was very generic to me. I'm just like, okay. But then when the show happens, I'm going, man, this score really kind of stands out a lot more than what I remember of the movie. Let's go back and watch the movie, and same thing. And I'm like, it is kind of generic. There's no real present theme, I guess you could say. I mean, there is a theme. It is there. It's at the beginning, but it's not prominent.
It's
enough.
not revisited. There are a lot of composers that will either revisit the motif that they set up at the beginning, or they'll rework it in some way. They'll change the key. They'll drag it out. They'll speed it up. But you didn't hear that. It was just to me, sporadic noise. Throughout the movie.
Yeah. If you're expecting the behavior of John Murphy, for example, you're not going to get it here. That's just not. I mean, honestly, I kind of felt spoiled with, because Chris, you and I have talked about some of our favorite composers when we first started talking, and I don't want to say that John Murphy is like my benchmark for like favorite composers, but he kind of is, just because of I'll use 28 Days Later as an example, because mostly because I hope everybody here knows the 28 Days Later soundtrack, but
Oh yeah.
you know, he takes that incredibly dark and kind of hopeless main theme of that movie, and he manages to present it again throughout the rest of the film in different ways. Even though it sounds almost the same, you still get a totally different feel based on what the scene is there. So unfortunately, Serenity just doesn't have any of those moments, and it's unfortunate, because we've all said the movie's great. We love the movie for the most part.
Yeah.
But it's just hard to know where the composition is going to take us next.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that Chris and I talk about when we talk about movie scores, and revisiting some of the movies that we love, because it makes us kind of nervous, because now we're looking at it from a different perspective. You're not just looking at, okay, this is a great movie. You're looking at it from the musical perspective, like, okay, now why did they do this? Why does this suck? You know, sort of thing going on here. And you know, the second episode that we did was Back to the Future, and that's my all-time favorite movie. I've even mentioned in an episode I could quote every single line in that movie, which drives him nuts. And it really does. But my fear was that now that we're looking at it from a different perspective, isn't this going to change how I feel about the movie? Because now I'm looking at it from the musical perspective. And the same thing happened to Serenity when I watched it. I'm like, am I going to have a different opinion about this movie? Because I just finished watching Firefly and listened to that, and now we're doing a comparison. I said, is that going to change my opinion on the movie?
Yeah.
So, and it sometimes does.
Yeah, unfortunately, it does. It really does. Because when you're listening to it, when you're really trying to point out the score in your head as you're watching the film, you're going, well, wait a minute, why did they do this? What was the motivation? And you're going, well, there should have been some music for this character. There should have been a music for this emotion, this storytelling moment right here. And there's nothing, or there's too much score, and you're just like, and so with Serenity, there were so many moments where you could have had like a outstanding theme throughout the entire film, but it wasn't there.
I think that it would have kind of brought the movie in a little bit better, and I think it would have. Granted, it was a good movie, as we've all discussed, but I think it would have kind of elevated it to that next level if that score was on point.
Well, and to use your point of Back to the Future, if you had like The Power of Love, that would, you're not using the lyrics, you're just using little bits of it throughout the film. They pop up, like you said, it tethers you back to something.
Right.
The only thing I will say here about Dave Newman, that because you mentioned that it sounded like he was experimenting quite a bit with this score. One thing that he did do that I thought was effective here was the theme of River Tam, and I'm not sure if you know about that specific piece or not.
I think that's like one of my favorite tracks was River Goes Wild.
He loves that.
And
yeah,
and that goes into the experimentation I was talking about, because there's like so many different noises going off, and it's just like the percussion instruments are just going crazy, and you've got this what sounds like a weird electric guitar coming in there.
But that's kind of reminiscent of what's going on in her mind, because her mind is all over the place. She doesn't have a stream of consciousness you would think that a typical person would have. She's got most of the schizophrenia. So, it was the piece was well done because it kind of reflected on what was going on in her mind mentally.
So, yeah, I mean, and in that sense, yeah, Dave Newman was great in that, because that was another thing too, because with the scene, the way it starts off, it's kind of, the colors are kind of muted, and she's doing her weird dance fighting that she's doing. And it's like, it's just like, it's just whatever. I'm just like, I'm kicking these guys across the room. It's no big deal. And the music is just like going crazy all of a sudden. But when it comes back into the reality format, the music is huge. And you've got this low brass coming in there, and the trombones are blasting the notes, the short staccato. Staccato. Thank you. Not spiccato. Staccato notes. And
Spaghetti!
Yeah. Stiletto. These short stiletto notes, these short staccato notes that are coming in there, and it really adds to the attention and the action that's going on. I thought that's one of my.
Yeah, I know it's really intelligent and a part of the score, I think.
Yeah.
Well, and he would also sample this out of tune piano specifically for parts of her theme as well too. And like you mentioned, some of the mental instability that's going on. I thought that an out of tune piano is perfect for a River because there's elegance in the piano, right? And sometimes even when you hear an off tune key, just like with River being rough around the edges at times, even though that key is off, there's still something to be admired about it, especially when you know about this. Yeah. Yeah. Just like how there's a beauty to River.
Yeah. Quite unpredictable, but enjoyable all the way. All the same.
Right. Exactly. I've used an untuned piano before, for stuff. And
Creepy stuff.
Well, not just creepy stuff. I've used it for emotional things. Thank you.
Yeah, so Chris, you're just sitting there at like 3 a.m. and all of a sudden Leslie shoots awake and you're just sitting there playing one key off,
Creepy
Don't worry, honey. Don't worry, honey. I'm going to be playing the violin and it's going to make you cry, but in a good way. We're getting there.
Next 5 hours. Let me get stuck.
Oh, man. That's hilarious. Well, there are a couple things I wanted to end here with. One being that the reviews for these scores, if you just kind of bounce around the internet a little bit, they're not going to match what we've talked about. There's going to be a lot more variance to it. And I didn't know if you had a chance to look into any of that.
I looked into some of it, and one of the things I was finding was they were talking about, I can't remember what it was. One of them I found, they didn't really like the Western sound of Firefly, and I'm going, what?
I think that the Western sound of Firefly, though, was very reminiscent, kind of, we skip years later to Cowboys versus Aliens. Because you've got this Wild West, and now you got this supernatural alien type of sci-fi element, and to me it was reminiscent. So because this is prior to that, it was ahead of its time. It was ahead of its time to put those two elements together. You got the West, but you got this supernatural sci-fi, because in essence, Firefly is a sci-fi show. You're in outer space. You've got aliens in it. And I feel like it was ahead of its time. So looking at those reviews, and I'm like, I don't know, because I think that it was on the precipice to something greater that we have seen, years later.
So what were you guys finding? What were you finding, Mark?
Well, oddly enough, I found people that were actually getting on Edmondson quite a bit for his use of synthesizer. And I thought that was really weird because the synthesizer is what balanced out the score of Firefly, because we've talked about how he uses, string instruments to get to a very specific setting for, we'll call it the localization of that Western feel, right? Like that's very consistent, and he uses that to establish scenes. Well, when it comes to movement and action sequences, he shifts away from those and instead uses synthesizer, usually paired with some type of percussion, in order to insinuate we are moving somewhere. And he does it a lot. If you go back and listen to it, the percussion and synthesizer takes us from one place to another typically. And so when people were getting on him for that, I went, well, if you're upset with Greg Edmondson, about the synthesizer, have you listened to Serenity at all? Because
right.
Because they have a full orchestra, and there are times where you don't even know the difference if it's the orchestra or the synthesizer.
And I think that the synthesizer also adds to that sci-fi element, because you're in outer space. Okay, you have to be smart enough to get in outer space, which means that you're like light years away from where we are now. So you would think that they would have different instruments, which would be synthetic instruments, synthesizers. So you've got all these elements. You connect. It helps the movie flow. It helps the scene flow. It adds to that sci-fi element. I don't see a problem with it.
Yeah,
I really don't.
And I even mentioned it. I said I liked how he could blend, his orchestral instruments with the synthetic sound, and I thought Edmondson did a great job of that. Newman did a great job of that as well, but in such a different way. I cannot believe that. I mean, really, they're getting on to him for that. I mean, I'm like, did they hear Serenity? Did they know
Did
what
they
was
watch
going on?
the show?
Well, I mean, it's the internet, so it's half complaining and half cats. So
Yeah.
that's just kind of
Yeah.
what it is.
Cute baby
Yeah.
ants.
Yeah. Honestly, Joe and I have seen very similar like reviews for other properties that we've been looking at, where like we either absolutely love something about it, and then we see reviews that go, "No one loved what we loved."
Just scathing. Yeah.
Yeah, and ironically enough, when it comes to Newman's score, people are actually there are reviews out there that say that they love the score, they wouldn't change a thing. There's absolutely like no judgment. Yeah, so
Amazing.
Oh, so here's what I want to know though: are they coming from it as fans of the show, coming on it as the movie, or are they just listening to the score itself and judging it that way? Now, judging it by itself, yeah, it's a good score. I mean, if you're not a fan of the show, you don't know nothing about Firefly, and you just happen to come across David Newman's score to Serenity.
Hadn't even watched the movie.
Yeah, hadn't
and
even
you
watched the
just pop
movie.
the score in.
Just pop the score in. Yeah, it's a good score.
Yeah.
But if you're coming at it from like what we're doing right now, fans of the show, fans of the movie, and we're comparing the two, then yeah, no, I'm sorry, it doesn't work.
I think it misses the
Mhm.
mark. I
Yeah.
think that could have done so much with the score that he didn't, and it was kind of disappointing to me because I would have liked to have seen the elements from the show in the music in the movie for a connectivity, even because it's from the same. It's the same people, it's the same universe. I would have liked to have seen some sort of continuity there.
Yeah.
So we're making it known how. Here's our review of the score.
This is how we feel. It missed the mark.
Could have been better.
A for effort.
Well, hey, Chris and Leslie, if you couldn't tell, we did, watch or listen to your show a little bit, and that's why we wanted to bring some of that element to our show too, right? Because we wanted to really utilize your talents and get your viewpoint on this. So absolutely, love that you could join us here, and also to introduce you to our viewers. And we wanted to just understand a little bit more about anything else you've got going on, as well as how to find you out there.
All right. Well, you can find us on social media. I mean, we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Just on Facebook and Instagram, just type in Measuring the Score. You should be able to find us. Twitter, we're at Measure the Score. Thanks to Twitter for not letting me have Measuring the Score. So it's Measure the Score. You can send us an email, measuringthescore@gmail.com. I mean, and we've got episode 7 out right now. The next one that's going to be coming out is Hard Rain. And yeah, Leslie's already yet, so you'll kind of have an understanding of where we're going to go.
That was tough, guys. I don't understand how you're going to take a natural disaster movie and take a heist movie and merge it into one movie. It's just too much going on.
Mhm.
Oh, come on, the score was great. So anyway, but yeah, so that's what we've got going on, and that's going to be episode 8, I believe. So yeah, that one I have a personal connection. You'll find out in the episode, but yeah. But
Awesome.
what was really great? What was really I got in touch with the composer Christopher Young, who did like Hellraiser and Urban Legend and the Ghost Rider film with Nicolas Cage. And I just got to ask him a question on Facebook. I said, what are your thoughts on the score? And he was very kind to send us some thoughts back. So we got to share that on the show. So that was really nice.
Awesome. Well, a couple parting notes here. I wanted to just mention that we referenced throughout the episode today. There's some really good opportunities for crossover content here for folks that are fans of both shows. The James Horner episode that Leslie mentioned is episode 5. As she mentioned, they're doing a composer showcase there. But as far as crossover content goes, y'all have done 2 episodes that we've also covered. Episode 2 is Back to the Future, as well as episode 6 for you going into the Star Trek 2009 reboot. So for fans of both shows, there's a lot of cool stuff you can see on both ends here. But once again, Chris, Leslie, we can't thank you enough for joining you. And hopefully we can sit down again and do this
Yeah,
in the
and
future as well.
maybe the next
That was
time we
great.
do this, we can dive exclusively into Johnny Steele and focus on Power of the Night for 1 full hour.
Definitely.
Make sure I'll feather my hair out just for that. I'll get the Aquanet out.
Oh, definitely. Please do it.
Oh, I got a
please do
crimper
it.
too. I could probably.
Yes.
Oh man. Oh, please do it. That would be awesome. Full on white snake video hair. Oh man.
Oh, beautiful.
It's gonna
I'll
be
get my biker jacket ready, primed and ready to go for this too.
I'll get my jean jacket, man. We'll do this.
Who's gonna wear the Michael Bolton wig?
Mark.
That's
there you
Mark.
go.
I can do it. My hairline, it's disappearing every day, guys. So it's getting ready for the wig. Yeah.
Nice.
Good,
Nice.
because he used to sing rock songs.
A huge thank you to Chris and Leslie for measuring the score, for helping us break down the extremely talented musical compositions of Firefly and Serenity. If you're not following your friends, you can find them on all major podcast websites, as well as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you enjoyed this topic, why not mention the show to other people who may enjoy it as well? As we mention often, and we do know it's literally every episode at least twice, please comment, subscribe, and leave a review, as this critically helps our show to continue to grow. Something about the interwebs really likes that. And no, we're not just covering up for how we love seeing you speak well of us.
Before you wonder if we're done with the Firefly verse, just hold on another 48 hours. We're wrapping up our deepest dive we've ever attempted by discussing 2005's Serenity, the full-length film based on the Firefly verse. We'll be joined by Sean of Cheap Seat Reviews, who is a huge fan of the movie and has a lot he'd like to share about it for our week's finale. And until next time, keep on dissecting.